Those questions are Alex Seitz-Wald. He's a political correspondent for National Journal. Kate Nocera, she's a Capitol Hill reporter at BuzzFeed.com. MSNBC political analyst Michael Steele, the former chairman of the RNC. And Crystal Ball, she's the co-host of MSNBC's The Cycle. Michael, former chairman of the Republican Party. I can think of no better person to start after an introduction like that.
I know nothing.
Well, so, I mean, I was trying to think of what the perfect first question to ask you is, and I had about 12 I came up with, but I'll just start with this. Yeah. We played that little montage there on Fox News. They're cooking the books. They're lying about the numbers. You don't think anything like that's going on here. You accept the 7 million number. I know we still have to learn some of the details demographically, but this is real.
Sure,
right?
I accept the 7 million number. I want to see what's behind the number. I want to see how many people paid. I want to see how many people are of a certain category that they're either older or younger, they're sicker or healthier, because all of that's going to drive what the premiums are going to be come September, October of this year when the insurance companies come back around and say, okay, here's your bill. So let's see what's behind the number. I get the sort of, 7 million, bad number. It's not a real number. They're cooking the books. That's for the base. That's to get folks to stay engaged in this conversation. As we've seen, the polls have ticked up and shown that now 49% as opposed to the 40 or 39% of the people actually support the law. So it's gaining some momentum as people have kind of come into the system. That's now new political reality for the party.
What does that do to your party? We say 7 million for the exchanges. We say another 3 million through Medicaid. I've seen projections that by 2014, the total number could double. It'll quadruple. By 2017, you could be talking about 20, 30 million Americans.
Again, my friends on the left are focusing on the number that's out there on the big screen. Right. That's not the number I'm concerned about. It's the numbers behind the big number that are really going to drive the success or failure of Obamacare. If you have more sick people in the system than well people, if you have more older people, younger people, this thing collapses in on itself because the whole thing is premised upon having those folks pay these new premium amounts that they otherwise weren't paying. So that's the reality for me. I can get behind a whole lot of the noise because it's kind of fun sometimes. But at the end of the day, just to be honest about it, but at the end of the day, the administration is still going to have to own up. As I've said before, I wasn't worried about the website. That was great fodder. When you have actual patients, that's when the weight of Obamacare comes to fruition for me.
Well, so, okay, we have two, national reporters here, Washington, D.C., covering the Republicans down there. I wonder if either of you this week, we just played some clips of things, that we found Republicans saying this week. We have all those ads that are being run against Obamacare. Listening to Republicans in Washington, D.C., just talking to people in Washington this week, did either of you pick up on any change in sort of the Republican thinking about this? Like, hey, we now have to account for 7 million plus 3 million. This can't just be repeal anymore. Did you pick up on any kind of a recognition that this changes the politics of it for them at all?
Immediately, no. Immediately, going into November, they still have to appeal to the base, do the votes, say, Obamacare is going to really hurt people. But I think privately, behind the scenes, there are Republicans who are kind of looking at this and saying, all right, it's the law. A lot of our constituents are going to benefit from it. We need the administration to help us at this point. And I think we saw that with a few Republicans appealing to the administration to kind of help with some enrollment things in different districts. You're not going to hear the hardcore conservatives like the Michelle Bachmans of the world or the Steve Kings of the world come out and say, you know what, this is, 7 million people, great. But I think most of them are starting to think, all right, now what do we do? How do we move forward?
Here's an interesting thing and this has been the story to me. This has been the big story of the politics of Obamacare or the Affordable Care Act, whatever you want to call it. So you take this poll from it's a national poll from the end of March. Do you support or oppose the health care law passed by Barack Obama and Congress in 2010? 41 support, 55 oppose. Note that Barack Obama is included in there. Next question, ABC News poll, same period. Overall, do you support or oppose the federal law making changes to the health care system? Support 49, oppose 48. So it does seem to me, like, Alex, one way I look at this in terms of the politics of 2014 is even if this thing called the Affordable Care Act, this federal health care law, is starting to deliver positive headlines, real results, and actual sign-up numbers, this thing called Obamacare maybe is separate in some people's minds and still can drive Republican turnout.
Yeah, I mean, it's a classic political problem here. You have the reality and you have the perception, and oftentimes the perception is more important than reality. And in Republican politics, among the base, Obamacare is no good, terrible, awful, and almost nothing that happens on the ground in reality is going to change that. And the problem for Republicans who want to soften their stance here is they're going to immediately open themselves up to attacks from the right, even if they're not in a primary. Scott Ridgell kind of walked it back this week.
Virginia, moderate Virginia
relatively
Republican.
swing district.
Right. Exactly. So this is, and this has been going on for months. Anytime Republicans put a little bit of daylight between the full repeal stance and themselves, they're going to get attacked from the right. So I think it's going to continue at least through this election because it's a stand-in for Obama. It's a stand-in for everything that Republicans hate about Democrats and Obama.
Yeah. Well, and I think part of the opposition, really all of the opposition to Obamacare, isn't so much about the law and the details and is it really going to work in reality. It is an ideological, fundamental opposition to government involvement in health care. So even though, you know, a lot of the rhetoric was around the fact that it's not going to work and there's going to be a death spiral and the website doesn't work and all of that, the real opposition is to the president himself and a fundamental ideological opposition. Now, most of America doesn't feel that way, right? Most of America celebrates the idea of having health care. So as the law increasingly works, those voices on the right that have an ideological opposition are going to be increasingly isolated. Now, I think as a political strategy in a midterm election where you're going to have a smaller electorate turning out and the law still feels very much up in the air, I think it can be an effective strategy for this year. Past that, they got to move on.
Well, I want to pick that up with Michael and pick up what Alex was saying too, just about how the name Obama and what that does to the Republican base has consistently done for the past 5 years.
Us mad.
So how can the Republican Party ever sort of just accept the legitimacy of something with his name in it?
No.
We'll talk about the long-term future of that, but after this break. But first, we do want to put in an update on the search for